Good evening and welcome to the Women's Roadmap to Retirement webinar. My name is Shay and I'm going to be with you for the next 30 minutes or so, and we're going to talk about the specific risks and challenges that women face in retirement. Now, while we're waiting for a few other people to come and join us tonight, which by the way, thank you for joining us, those of you who are with me right now. But as we're waiting, I just want to point out to you that you do have the opportunity to ask some questions tonight. If you take a look to the right of your screen, you'll be able to see there's a place where you can type in your questions and hopefully we'll get a chance to answer those. All right, so before we get started tonight, I just want to point out this disclosure slide. If you could take a moment to read it. Now, I'm not here to give advice. The purpose of tonight is a financial education. It's just to give you a few pointers to some of the risks and challenges that we face in retirement. It's not to advise you. Advice is very personal, one-on-one, and we don't give blanket advice. So let's get started with our webinar, the specific risks and challenges that we as women face in retirement or in preparing for our retirement. Now, typically, this has been something men have took steps to reach out to speak to a financial advisor or educate themselves or seek advice. It's a conversation men have amongst themselves in the offices or with one another in the workplace, but not typically we as women. We tend to think we're not investment savvy, but did you know it's probably more important, if not at least just as important for women to have a financial plan as it is for men. Now, when I say more important, let me ask you a question. Why would you think that is? I'm just going to give you a minute to think about that. Well, hopefully if you came up with the right answer, if you said it's because we live longer. Absolutely, women on average live 5 years longer than men. In fact, it's a shocking reality that 80% of men die married, whereas 80% of women pass away single. So what are we going to do about that? There's a few things you're going to have to know to be sure you're absolutely prepared in the event that that's you. So let's go ahead and start at the beginning. So what has a picture of a mountain got to do with our retirement? Well, it has a lot actually. We can almost take a look at this and it can represent our financial life. See what the bottom of that mountain, that's us starting out, our first job, and the top of the mountain is retirement, and the time in between is the climb. That's the years it's taking us to prepare for retirement. We're all at different stages or level, and I don't know how prepared you are, but our goal is to get you to the top of that mountain, that peak, and be in good shape and ready to face your retirement in the way you would love to and enjoy. Unfortunately, the real truth is that climb up the mountain can be filled with many bumps in the road. A little bit about myself. I may be here today, but I'm not without many challenges. As a single woman, I have faced divorce. But as a young girl in my home, my parents were not good with finances, and I left home just before my 18th birthday at 17, and off I went to London, big city, by myself. So I've really been on my own for a very long time, and I've had to find my own way, and it takes a lot of courage. But somehow I've managed to survive, not just by myself and learning wisdom on the way, but also I've had to depend on God and trust in Him, and He has proven Himself faithful. So the first thing I want to say to you all listening to me, I know there's many bumps in the road. Some of you are single, some of you are divorced, some of you are older and widowed or older and divorced. And you can say, Shay, but it's all right for you to sit there, but it's really not, because I've been there. I've probably been there. And I think I've had to pick up the pieces 2, 3, or 4 times along the way. The biggest one being about 10 years ago when I faced divorce. You see, I was married, but unfortunately I became the one responsible for the finances. At one point I became the main breadwinner. My husband, when I married him, had a little bit of debt, which I didn't worry too much about. until I actually found myself with that debt and I realized how uncomfortable I was with it. So my great goal was to get us out of debt, which caused my husband to actually resent me for it. We were not on the same page financially. He thought everybody lived with debt and debt was okay. But for me, it was very unsettling. So that was the first thing we overcame, and I worked hard to help contribute to overcoming that. And lo and behold, as soon as we paid off the debt and all my earnings and savings and hard work had paid that down and we'd reached that goal and our life should have a chance to get better, well, I got the phone call, didn't I? That phone call at my office during the day was, I don't want you. Don't come back. I found myself driving around that evening thinking, oh my goodness, what do I do now? But you know, onwards and upwards, and when you're a survivor you find a way, and somehow I came through all of that. It just so happened that my job at the time was, I was working for someone who owned their own company who was a financial advisor, and he had already been saying to me, Shay, you'd be good at this, you should do this, you're great with numbers, you should do this. He was right. I had always been good with numbers, and so I took the opportunity to dive in and go get educated to be a financial advisor so that I could open myself up to more opportunity to earn. So that got that started. But I know it's a different story for you. But nonetheless, we're all faced with our challenges, and getting to the top of that mountain is not without many obstacles. And when we reach the top, we've got to find our way down. But did you know there's just as many obstacles on the way down the mountain as there are up the mountain? You see, you've all heard of Mount Everest, but did you know how many people die climbing Mount Everest? There's a lot. But do most people die on the way up or on the way down the mountain? Well, would you believe it? It's actually on the way down. You see, they think because they've arrived to the top, they've achieved their goal. Well, yes, but it's still only halfway there. On the way down the mountain, there's still many risks to be faced. When it comes to our finances, one of the biggest risks is longevity. Will we outlive our income? In which case, do you know if you have a plan in place? Is your plan going to work? Are you going to outlive it? Well, if you're a mountain climber, one of the wisest things you could do is get a Sherpa to help you, a guide to help you down that mountain. Well, why wouldn't you do that financially? You want to make sure that once you've reached that peak, you know how to do the descent as successfully as you got up there. All right, let's take a look at some numbers here. Did you know 49% of women fear being broke or homeless in their retirement? That's a huge number. We're outliving men, and when that happens, we lose one of our social security checks. Hey, the good news is we get to keep the larger one, but we lose the smaller one. Did you know your taxes? When you're married, you can claim a deduction for a married couple, but if you're on your own, you're reduced to a single deduction, which means your taxes are going up in retirement. 90% of women believe they need to be more involved financially. That means is you're asking questions, but are you seeking the answers? You're aware that you need to understand investments, you need to understand how to prepare and how to have a plan, but are you reaching out to do something proactive about it? As I mentioned earlier, if you look to the right of the screen, there's an opportunity for you to plug in some questions, or if you want to have an opportunity to speak to somebody for about 15 minutes, we're going to be making my calendar available to you where you can get on the phone and reach out to me where I'll answer your questions for you. But you're going to have to be the one that's proactive to reach out. The last number we hear is 44% of American women are going to either be widowed, retired, single, or divorced. Hey, even if you're one of the ones that are married today, at some point this could be you. All right, let's take a look at our next topic, Social Security and how that affects you. Let's look at how we optimize our Social Security, because there are ways. 4 subjects I want to touch on briefly tonight are eliminating zeros, inheriting your spouse's benefit, divorced widowed survivor benefits, and Social Security break-even points. The first one, eliminating zeros. I'm sure many of you have never heard of what that is. But let me take an example using Mr. and Mrs. Jones. It's a hypothetical example, but in my example, Mr. and Mrs. Jones went to college together. They met at college and decided to get married. When they graduated, they both took the same job, earning the same income. But for Mrs. Jones, she decided she wanted to take a few years out to raise her children. And the years that she was absent from the workplace, we call those the 0 years. That means that for those years, she was not contributing to her Social Security. Now, everyone's Social Security check is based off the 35 highest earning income years. So for every year extra you work, you can drop off one of those lower income years. But in the case of not working, you got 0. And so if you want to eliminate that 0, that may mean for you working later in life, working longer than you anticipated. Now let's see what happened to Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones did not take time off to raise the children. He was able to stay in his job, continue earning the same salary that Mrs. Jones could have earned had she have stayed in that job. For Mr. Jones, he had no zeros to eliminate. Every year he earned, and every year he earned, he also contributed to his Social Security check. What does that mean? Well, at the end of the day, when it was time to retire, it meant Mr. Jones, on average, his Social Security check was going to be somewhat higher than Mrs. Jones because he did not have 0 years, and also he contributed to all those years to his Social Security check. It also meant that his earnings were somewhat higher than Mrs. Jones. So on average, Mrs. Jones, because she took out time out raising their kids, her Social Security check was going to be less than her husband's. This is one of the things we as women face. Hey, if it's not children we're not in the workplace for, it's our parents. Now back to my story. A few years ago, my parents both got terminally ill around about the same time, and if you can hear from my accent, I'm not from America. I'm actually from England. And so my parents were not only terminally ill, but they were in another country. And my sister was there taking care of Mom the best she could, but Mom also became physically disabled, and it got a bit challenging for her. And so it was rather traumatic for me to be here in America. Now, based on my profession, I had done the wise thing. I had saved for a while, so I had some resources to be able to take some time out of the workplace. What I didn't plan for was how long I would be absent. So I had a little bit of time here just recently at home in England taking care of my aging parents. Now, don't get me wrong, I was happy to do it, glad to do it, and wouldn't have had it any other way. But as women, it's us who tend to do it. My brothers, on the other hand, were not there for that. They had their own families. They were in the workplace. But somehow we women, we're just the nurturers, aren't we? We're the ones that are going to jump there and say, I'll be there for you, Mom. I'll be there for you, Dad. Don't worry, you're not going to die alone. And so it tends to be us women that are on the hook for that. What about if you're widowed or divorced? Right, moving on, let's talk about widow and divorced benefits. If you are a widow or a widower, you actually can claim reduced benefits as early as age 60. Were you aware of that? But that is available to you. Now, once you get your deceased spouse reaches full retirement age, or what would have been their full retirement age, you can claim against that benefit too. Now, here's a good little tip. Are you aware that if you remarry but you're claiming against your deceased spouse's benefit, that remains unaffected? In other words, you get to keep that. But let's see the difference for divorcee benefits. The good news is that if you're a divorcee but you were married to your ex-spouse for 10 years or more, you can actually claim against his Social Security, his or her Social Security. Now, why is that important? because there were many women that did give a lot of years to being home, taking care of the family. And if that's the case for you, or the situation you're in, or you earned significantly less than your husband, your ex-husband, while you were married, then it's possible that your ex-spouse's benefit is bigger than your benefit. So that could be a useful little tip for you right there. However, what happens should you remarry? Well, in the case you want to get married, or you do remarry, you actually have to give up that benefit. You don't get to keep it. All right, so if you've got any questions regarding Social Security, just remember, let me remind you, you do have an opportunity to type in with those questions, or give us a call at the end. You'll see where there's an opportunity for you to schedule that call and ask your questions. All right, moving on to our next subject, which is longevity. Men versus women. I've already told you that typically women outlive men by about 5 years, which is creating a situation where we as women need to take hold of the reins more and begin to prepare for our financial future. You see, if you are a woman age 65 years or older, your life expectancy is that 1 in 4 of you are going to live beyond the age of 90. On the other hand, 1 in 10 of you could live beyond the age of 95. Now, my grandmother, my Nan as we called her, she outlived her husband by 20 years. That's quite a long time. She was a younger widow. She had to take care of herself. She was on her own for that length of time. So I've said we outlive 5 years, but it could be so much longer. So let me ask you a question. How prepared are you for that? The biggest risk you're going to face in retirement, other than longevity, is the cost of health care. See, we spend all our lives saving money and preparing for retirement, or we should be doing that. But then once we retire and slow down, we can often spend a good chunk of that money on paying for health care. Have you got a plan in place? Have you got anything in place to mitigate the costs? The costs are extremely expensive and going up, but there are ways that you can pay for that. One of the biggest complaints I hear is, oh, but Jay, traditional long-term care insurance isn't that expensive. Yeah, it's not cheap, but what if I don't use it? Well, you lose it. That's typical of most insurance of that type. But there are other ways around that, and so if that's something that's important to you, you want to make sure you reach out and find out what your options are there. Or if the cost of long-term care is important to you and a concern for you, make sure you type in the comments section to the left to reach out with your questions. So let's take a look at your parents' retirement versus your retirement. Things have really changed since your parents retired. Back then, they had what was called a pension plan. It was fully funded and paid for by their employer. In fact, it was one of the benefits, one of the rewards for staying with a company for a long time. Today, they've pretty much all but disappeared. So your parents, with that pension check and their Social Security check, they could pretty much pay the bills. Anything they had saved in their 401k was the icing on the cake for them. I've known many people who came in the early days when I got into this industry who, they had stayed in their job for most of their lives. They were married to the same woman and they had lived in the same house ever since they'd been married. These people were typically came off what we call the Depression. And so they had learned that stability and security was the most important things to them. Fast forward to today, things have changed drastically. First off, we're changing jobs every 3 to 5 years. We're not staying with the same employer. There's no benefit to that. You see, those pension plans that your parents and grandparents enjoyed, they're all but just about disappeared today. It's not typical. It's hard to find that. Then we have Social Security. Well, the majority of us have been the generation of consumers. That means we're spending, we're not saving. Because of that, we're facing a future where we have nothing more in retirement other than our Social Security check. Well, if that's you and you're facing that, I'm sure you're well aware that the chances that that's going to cut it is slim to none unless you do something else about it. My question is, what are you going to do about it? You don't have to face it alone. That's what we're here for, to help you plan and prepare and ensure you put a plan in place to make sure that you have sufficient income coming in when you retire. If that's something you're concerned about or is of interest to you, make sure you write in those comments. See, if your Social Security check's not going to cut it, then you've got to build your own nest egg. You're on the hook. You're responsible for those savings. Are you or are you not saving? Are you prepared? Are you not prepared? That's my question to you. All right, moving on to our next topic, taxes. Not one we really want to talk about, I know, but another thing that seems to be happening is, do you think in the future taxes are going to go up or going to go down? Well, you're well aware that our country has been through a major crisis, and with that crisis, there was a lot more stimulus spending. Now, how is that stimulus spending going to be funded? It's like creating a national debt. How are we going to pay that back? Well, unfortunately, it'll be you and I that get hit with it in our taxes. So my question to you is, do you think your taxes are going to be higher than they are today in your future or lower? If you think higher, you may want to think about how you can plan to mitigate or reduce some of those taxes. You see, with certain planning and income planning and proper tools, it is possible to find a way around some of it to make sure you're not overpaying taxes during the years you need your money the most. You see, many of you are saving in your 401k and thinking that's what'll take me to retirement. But did you know that if you're sitting here today and you have 500,000 or 250,000, whatever it is you have in that 401k, you think I've got 250,000 saved up, or you think I've got 500,000 saved up. Well, the reality is you do not, because the moment you make a withdrawal, part of that money is going to Uncle Sam. So if you want to find a way that you can reduce your taxes in retirement, make sure you click on the link there beside you on the right of your screen. As I said, we have my calendars available to you. We want to give you 15 minutes to talk to us, and let's see if I can answer some of those concerns for you. As you've heard from listening to me tonight, there's many risks and challenges that we as women are facing in retirement. We're living longer than men. When that happens, our Social Security goes down as we lose one of our checks. Maybe if you're on your own already and you're only ever going to have one Social Security check in retirement, you've already heard from me. The chances are your check is lower than a man of the same age as you because he had more earning years and paid more into Social Security than you did. Because we're living longer, we're facing as women higher costs in healthcare. So it's an eye-opening reality for us. Take a look at this. If you retire at age 62 and you live till you're 92, that's 1/3 of your life is spent in retirement. 1/3 of your life to fund from savings and things that you're doing today. So if that's you and you're afraid of longevity, or you've got a history of that within your family, then one thing you can do is make sure you have a properly planned income plan for those years, that you're preparing today for what you will need in your future. You want to take a look at how you're spending. You don't want to eat seed today that you need to have planted and growing for your future. Many of you have dreams of what you hope to do once you're free from that job and in your retirement years. The thing that's most common to me is I hear people are going to travel more. They're going to go abroad. They're going to see places they haven't been to. In order to do that, you're going to have a well-planned income plan that not only pays for your bills, but it allows you to do the things you want to enjoy doing when you retire. If that's you and you just want a second opinion on your income plan, make sure you click on the link to the right of your screen there, and make sure we have a chance to get together and talk about it. Let me take a look and review your plan, and I'll let you know, yes, you're on track, or no, you're not. All right, and before we close, I just want to mention to you, we have been through a huge crisis and a correction in the market. What are some of the things you can do, though, if we do go through a market correction? How can you better handle a crisis when it hits? Well, one of the first things you must do during a market downturn is do not get emotional. See, every time I've been through a number of these in my career, and every time it's panic, sell, fear, sell. Selling out of panic and selling out of fear. That may not be the best option for you. So the first thing is you don't want to make decisions based on emotions or fear. The second thing is you want to understand your actual risk. What do you mean by that, Shay? Well, your 401k and your investments are usually invested in the stock market. We call that exposure to risk. Some types of investments are more riskier than others. Simple example is stocks versus bonds. If you're in equities and stocks, usually they're a little bit more growth orientated and come with risk. If you're in bonds, that's typically less risky than stocks. And so when we say, are my investments actually invested according to my risk tolerance? What we mean is, do they align with what you can stomach? If you cannot stomach what we've just been through, or you panicked when you saw your 401k drop in value, it could be that you're misaligned with your actual risk tolerance. Now, it's a very simple way to measure that. So if you want a second opinion on that, I strongly encourage you to give me a call and reach out to me. There is a way we can take your holdings and your investments and your statements and measure them, and then ask you a few questions to see what your risk tolerance is and check, does your investments line up with your risk tolerance, or are they misaligned with your goals? The other thing to do is act your age. As a rule of thumb, we use the number 100, and the amount of risk you should be taking is, let's say you're a 30-year-old today. Then your risk score is 70. We take the 30 away from 100. 70 out of 100 is pretty high. That means you can invest somewhat more aggressively than someone who's, say, a 50-year-old or a 70-year-old. If you are 50 years old, you want to start reducing your risk to that of a 30-year-old. And of course, if you're 70 years old, you want to slow it down just a little bit, because you can't afford those losses in the market, because you simply don't have the time to recover. And lastly, having an actual plan. To me, this is the most important. Having a plan for your retirement. See, by having a plan that takes into an account how long you've got to retire, how long you're going to be in retirement for, how much you need when you retire, the cost that it's going to be to pay the bills, to do the things you want to enjoy. What happens if there's a long-term care event or an illness? Or what happens if there's a need for survivorship? You're a couple and one of you pass away earlier than expected. These are some of the things that you must factor in. And as you factor in all the possibilities and you've got that covered within your plan, this is one of the ways that you could experience peace of mind today concerning your future. So if you either have a plan or would like to have a plan, and you just want a plan reviewed or a plan created, make sure you click on that link and take advantage of that 15-minute phone call that you're being offered, and we can begin the conversation towards seeing how your plan could work for you in your retirement. And finally, before we close tonight, hey, there's only 37% of women actually work with a financial advisor. Now, you're listening to me tonight because you want to be more educated. You recognize you do need to know more and understand more. You've either got some concerns or some things that you want answered about your financial future. And if that's you, go ahead and click on the link and make sure you reach out to us. I've made my calendar available to you with 15-minute slots for you to call in, and let's have a conversation. Let's see what we can do to keep the dial moving forward in the right direction for you. So when you do give us a call, if that leads to you coming in to see us, some of the things that we're going to do for you is optimize your Social Security income. We'll do a complimentary review of all your existing retirement income plan. We'll answer some of your questions you had for tonight. We'll look at ways we can possibly reduce your tax liability. We'll discuss with you strategies to reduce your tax liabilities. And we will do a complimentary stress test of your portfolio to make sure your risk is in line with your personal risk tolerance. Also, another thing we hadn't mentioned but that we do is we take a look at the fees within your accounts. Are you aware of how much your investments are costing you and how much you're paying? We'll take a look at that for you. We also want to be sure that the types of investments you have are aligned with your personal goals and wishes. If you want a complimentary retirement income plan for you to take home with you, make sure you give us a call and reach out to us so we can help you with that. And finally, I just want to thank you for tuning in tonight and listening to what I've had to say. I look forward to hearing from you, answering your questions, and meeting some of you in person.